Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Costume Co. I am your host today, Heidi, and we're doing another costume designer interview today. And today, my guest is Elisabeth Vastola. She is the costume designer for the Bondsman, which you'll see up there. It's a new show on Amazon. It's actually it's a series, and she's here to talk to me about the costumes. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Really, really excited to chat.
Yeah, and you're in New York today, and I'm in Toronto, Canada, so we're not too far from each other. We're
Yeah.
both enjoying some nice weather
Yes.
for once. So to get the conversation started, I just thought, this is my first time meeting you. I thought it would be really nice to know a little bit about you. So would you mind telling us a bit about your background and how you got into costume design?
Sure. So I am a born and bred New Yorker, born in the city, grew up in the city, and then also in, Westchester, about 30 minutes north of the city. And I think I credit my geographical and then also just spiritual closeness to New York with, as being a huge influence on why I decided to, take a crack at being an artist, really, as, going into a creative field for a career. And I always had, an equal level of interest in literature and art history and fashion history and pop culture, honestly. And so I think that as I sort of tried out, different directions and dipped my toe into different opportunities in my adolescence and then, early 20s, I really was able to focus in and understand more about what costume designing was all about and how it really coalesced all of those interests together. And I also think, I work pretty much exclusively at the moment in, motion picture, but New York's theater scene and, at being able to be close to and experience both as, an audience member and a fan, but then as well as, working as, small little internships or following around different costume designers, was a huge boon to me in terms of being able to be, in the environment of design and seeing what that whole world was all about, and realizing early on that it could be a career, that someone could pay you to do something that you really loved, and, idolizing different costume designers from an early age. It was just really inspiring to me. And so I decided after college to go for it, so to speak. And, I've been fortunate enough to not have to look back, and just kind of continue to grind and climb my way through. And now I'm here.
It's amazing. I always love hearing, I've been interviewing various costume designers. I always love hearing how they arrived at this. And one of the biggest things I always hear is that I can't believe I get to do this for a living. This is
Yes.
amazing,
Yeah.
It's so true. And also, I really appreciate it because I oftentimes have people who watch my show who are aspiring and want to know, hey, how do I go about doing that? So, shadowing a designer that you love, or is a wonderful sort of way to get into it. So, now, for those who aren't familiar with The Bondsman, because it's new to Amazon and they may not have seen the show. So when I got approached about it, I'd already started watching it because, I'm a huge horror fan, which you may not know.
Yes.
So, yeah, so I was already on it. And, but for those who don't know about it, do you want to explain a little bit about the show?
Sure. The Bondsman really combines so many different threads, I think, together, no pun intended from a
Yes.
designer, but it's part a story. It's, at its core, it's a story of Hub Halloran, played by Kevin Bacon, who finds himself in the somewhat surreal, supernatural situation of dying and coming back to life, and realizing that his previous kind of, run of the mill job as a bondsman has now been tweaked in a special way, and his deal of, for coming back to life is that he's going to have to work for the devil essentially and hunt down different demons that have escaped hell and infiltrated their small town in Georgia. So, at its core, that's essentially the story. It's also an incredible, I think, ensemble piece, but, that weaves together Hub's family and, his current ex-wife, their son together, his mother. There's a few other characters, that come in and populate the story, and how his support system, so to speak, kind of end up rallying around him with this, kind of incredible new vocation that he has. And, it's funny. It's a comedy. It's also a very, could be scary. It's has a supernatural kind of vibe to it. And I think, but the overarching kind of influence on it is this sort of Southern Gothic horror umbrella that really drives a lot of the decisions that are made, aesthetically and, on the page as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say that Hub has sort of a certain skill set that's perfect for this job, right?
Yes.
So you're already set up for that. Okay, so prior to this, though, had you ever worked in horror? And like, if you haven't, like, what are your thoughts on working in horror? Is there any difference?
So when I was in my 20s, sort of in the late 2000s, early aughts, I would say most of my initial experience working in film was in lower budget horror in the city. There's this incredible filmmaker, Larry Fessenden, who is just a real icon. And we actually, it was either, no, it must have been 2 years ago, the MoMA did a retrospective of his work that he had like produced and also directed and acted and written in. And he has really been, a father figure, I would say, to a lot of current incredibly successful directors, that I had the fortune to work with at, on small projects, in the city. And, some of course, like Jim Mickle, who's the current showrunner of Sweet Tooth on Netflix, and
I'm a big
Ty
fan of that
West.
show, by the way.
Yeah.
Love Sweet Tooth.
Yeah, and Ty West, who's become just an icon in horror, and a lot of those projects took place like at Larry's compound in upstate New York, where you'd sort of prep as much as you can in the city, and then we'd all like haul up there for a couple of weeks and make really fun, well done, and crazy horror films. And that I'll never forget my first film with them. One of the continued collaborators and artists that would work on those films is this incredible makeup artist, special effects makeup artist, Brian Spears. And it was my first project. And I remember in the upcoming scene, the actor had to be bloody. Like, it was post a bloody scene. And I was like, what am I supposed to... Brian, like, what am I supposed to do with the blood on the shirt, and where should I put it, and how does this work? And he was like, just go for it. And he like took his spritzer and just started like, dousing this white shirt in blood, and fake blood, of course.
Yes.
Although up there, who knew what we were up to? But,
upstate New York, yes.
It's like, that was my first sort of moment of like, wow, this is really there's something really sculptural and artistic about this, and there's also a little bit of like a ethic kind of attitude of like, just go for it and do the best you can and go forth. And I loved working on horror movies, and I've since worked on The Purge, election year, and various
Yes, The
other
Purge. Yes, I
projects.
saw that in your bio, of course.
Yeah, and there's just something about adding that, like, needing to contend with the costume plus this like very like viscous material of either fake blood or fake mud or fake, like, so all this extra level of art that goes on top of it that I just. And then there's also, the sort of logistical issues of how many are you going to need and what are the gags and what's the stunts like, and that all of those kind of problems to solve. I love getting into it, and there's something more stressful to me about having to keep the costumes clean rather than having to, accurately get
That's
them dirty.
I never even
Yeah.
thought of that. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
you get to, and also you get to build on it, right? It gets to be built
Oh
up
yeah.
over time. So that's fun. You've got all the different stages, and it
Yep.
is a lot of artistry. And I know a lot of designers I've talked to that, they always rely on their breakdown team. So
Oh,
important. It just,
100%.
they don't get enough accolades, in my humble opinion. It's the difference. It's such a huge difference, right?
It's everything. I mean, at
Hmm.
the end of the day, that it's everything in terms of not only needing to ride this line between, like, this needs to feel real, and like you don't want the audience to be taken out of what has happened in the scene, and now, the costume is covered in mud, but it can't actually be mud. I mean, sometimes it can, but sometimes it can't. And so
Hmm.
this sort of it's so important because it can so immediately go wrong and look wrong, and and yet on the other hand, you're also trying to create the art, like, it's impossible to not look at, um for example, in the Bondsman, like Hub's Bondsman vest. It's impossible
Yeah, I've
to
got
not
a
look
picture of
at
it
that.
here.
Oh yeah. And not feel like, is it balanced? And how much blood do we put on the text? And
Mhm.
like, how do we get this black nylon super resistant material to take, dirt and blood and mud and have it feel almost like second skin to Kevin, and not have it feel like it's too much too. I mean, it's really difficult and complicated, actually, and I could not agree with you more. Breakdown artists are really like the lifeblood of these projects, and it's also it's so difficult. You're working with a lot of rough chemicals a lot of the time, and so
Mhm.
often they're not given the proper space or time or crew. And um, it's I mean, hats off to everyone I've ever worked with, and especially the Bondsman team. And yeah, I mean, it's a huge part of costume design, especially for horror.
Yeah, and oftentimes too, I'm assuming that, even on set, you would have to sort of add or take away. Like, so, you might try to do as much in advance, but on set, you might be like, oh, like I've heard of situations where the director will be yelling, more mud or something,
Yes, more, less. Also, once you're looking in the monitor with the,
Hmm.
and the other thing about horror is, which was I like 50-50 for the Bondsman, which is a lot of times horror happens in the dark and happens at night. And but then, so on the one hand, you're trying to get this show up, and in those situations you might add a little more glycerin or a little more gloss to whatever you're using to really catch the light. But then in the Bondsman, just like in the photo you just showed, he's walking around in broad daylight with a
Yeah.
bunch with makeup and the bandage, and then all of this artistry on his vest. And so, and there, that brings another type of sort of anxiety of like, wow, there's nowhere to hide. you know?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of True Blood in that sense, because in True
Yeah.
Blood, you've got a lot of daytime shots, like while the vampires are sleeping, that, but at night, you have the night shots. But he wakes up within a wall as well, so you're not just dealing with
Yes.
you're dealing with plaster dust, and you're dealing with all of the environments. And I don't, who knows how long he's been there? I'm not even sure how long he's been in that wall.
Overnight. Yeah.
Oh, overnight. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so you're having all that to contend. Well, So this brings me to another question then for you regarding your inspiration. So I was reading that you did a lot of research on Southern Gothic imagery, and I just mentioned True Blood, which of course is also sort of a Southern Gothic story based on a series of books. But you were looking at films like Blood Simple and Texas Chainsaw Massacre as influences. I'm not really good with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have tried to watch it. It's a little bit beyond the pale for me.
Yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you want to tell a little bit your influences there though?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's like the thing with Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me is this really neutral color palette, a lot of woodsy, foresty interiors, and a lot of sort of everyday type clothing that has to go through the mill, and really kind of natural, like cottons and linens, and really natural materials and fabrics that then have to take a lot of take a serious amount of work onto them. And so I really it's this sort of taking inspiration from that palette and those choices in terms of how is that going to then support the blood, and how can we get these sort of common, really easily recognizable, ready to wear clothing to then get heightened and feel, an extra level of danger and shock and awe, really. And I also think tonally it was very, inspirational. I mean, I think ultimately we I knowing that Kevin Bacon's character was going to wear a lot of black and blue and beige and neutral colors, it was important for me to look at how that's worked before, as a way that he feels, on the one hand, it's Kevin Bacon, so of course needs to feel elevated and will already bring that himself. The costume doesn't have to do much. But on the other hand, he needs to also, as a bondsman would, blend into the surroundings and feel really sort of salt of the earth in his town. And so, it's about silhouette. It's about, like I mentioned, palette, and then sort of try to figure out how you're going to marry that to this extra level of gunk and art, and really the color red, how, I
Mhm.
mean, how is that gonna marry in, and so I think it's always important, these iconic movies that have come before, that really are the seeds for what you're doing now. It's important to really look back and study.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
love, like, I think there's a lot of an homage to sort of these retro 1970s sort of classic horror films that we've all,
Yes.
well, many of us grew up on. Not everyone in my audience would have, but myself being a middle-aged lady, I grew up on some of these horror movies like Carrie, for instance, one
Oh,
of my
yes.
favorite movies of all time. I was a little girl when I saw it. I kind of had to sneak to see it, but I've always been a huge horror fan. So now, also, we were chatting earlier. I understand that you drew inspiration from a couple of iconic photographers, Gregory Crewdson and William Eggleston, and I'm not familiar with them. I have a few photos, but do you want to explain a little bit about them if people in my audience don't know who they are?
Sure. So William Eggleston, I mean, both are still alive. But of course, Eggleston he was born in 1939, so he's in his 80s now. And Gregory Crewdson,
I have
born
a
in
few photos here I can show too. Just a,
yeah. So one of the things I love about looking at Eggleston's photography is, first of all, it's so cinematic. It feels very much like you're looking at stills, from motion picture. And he really, one of the things I also love and use Eggleston for constantly is he really is credited often with sussing out the power of color in kind of the everyday world and everyday objects and everyday situations, you know? And so the way in which you can use big, bold strokes of color against everyday life, but not have it feel composed or styled in a certain way, I think to me is constantly what many costume designers are after. You know, you immediately look at this woman.
Yeah, it's amazing. The two fabrics, right?
Yes, and it works so well. It's also a great way. He's a wonderful way to kind of get your collaborators, you know, showrunners, directors, actors on board with prints. One of the things that, you know, and bold color amidst a sort of like humdrum, run of the mill environment. And there's so many, there's so much contemporary costume design work happening that can often feel like, how are we going to elevate this? You know, how are we going to sort of make this feel more cinematic and more punchy in the frame, but not without sort of abandoning character and story and what's on the page. And so Eggleston, there's just his photography, and it doesn't even have to be his work, you know, with clothing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what shows up immediately for me, but the composition of color in the everyday world, I think. And also, I mean, I mean, his photographs in the 70s and, you know, in the 80s are particularly juicy because I feel like there's a little bit of a renaissance, you know, just like we mentioned, sort of, you know, especially in the Bondsman, you know, kind of looking back on those decades and feeling like we can still pull them into present day work without it feeling like a period piece. And I think that kind of ends a little bit in this when we think, you know, sort of historically with the late 60s. You know, once we sort of get into the more of the late 60s, 50s, 40s, and then we're really kind of reaching, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to there could so easily be 70s and early 80s references in the Bondsman, you know, and have it feel kind of you know, woven in a more natural way.
I also have these ones of Crutzen here,
Yeah,
which
Crutzen.
are
I mean,
amazing.
like, you know, what we were talking about, this sort of the modern day surrealism, I think, and the kind of that are truly arresting image, and also the balance between, you know, what's going on in the foreground with, you know, that the woman on the ground versus this light coming in through the windows, and you know, Crutzen, I would say, of course, is much more, let's say, composed or more outwardly of a composition than Eggleston, so to speak. You know, I think there's a little bit more of a sort of cinema verite or a sort of like moment in time that is being captured by Eggleston, whereas Crutzen is quite obviously, and I think makes no apologies about it, telling the viewer that he's composing his image. And both photographers also, I think, tell incredible stories within their image in a snapshot. And
Absolutely.
costume
They almost look,
design,
they also, sorry, Liz, they also almost look like paintings to me.
100%.
Like the way you say the way the
100%.
composition is done.
Yes, yes. And Crutzen is using, you know, contemporary clothing and proving how you can work it to feel shock and awe and horror and anxiety, you know. And I think that is something that costume designers of contemporary work are constantly trying to learn, you know, and to myself included, you know, to sort of be like, how can I get what I bought at Macy's and put it in a this sort of larger than life cinematic context, you know what I mean, either because it's the budget or what's available to me, or, how can I go down to the Savers or the local thrift store, or how can I take what I bought at Levi's or Filson and insert it into this really stylized artistic piece. And I think photography is, and not necessarily fashion photography, is such a juicy resource of a reference. I mean, it's impossible, Crudston and Eggleston, it's impossible. It's like they always show up in my references because
That's amazing.
I'm just always learning from them and more,
So what did you study in school? Did you do art history, or what was your
in college? I double majored in English and art history. And
so you're able to draw on that as your
yes,
absolutely.
yes. And
I'm a huge lover of costume history because I did theater in school, and we did costume history, and I'm always like, I love like all the different historical periods. So I always like when I see something like that in a show, I'm always like, yes.
Yeah.
But I've been really kind of more recently falling in love with contemporary shows because I don't think they get as much attention as the corset wearing historical shows. And I have such an appreciation for it because even though it's not like you're like, okay, it's a shop show more than say, you're building from scratch, there is still a huge amount of storytelling that's taking place. And so what are your perspectives on that? Sorry, I didn't have that in the questions. I'm just throwing that out there too.
No, I agree. I mean, I and I think that the problem that comes up, I think, especially with contemporary costume design, is sometimes there are projects that, you would term as not a costume project, right? So it's like, and you feel this yearning to take to take swings and risks and express yourself as a designer, even though what's set out in front of you is either a cop show or a law show or X, Y, and Z. But I think and sometimes it's not to denigrate those projects. I think that I did one season of a show that unfortunately didn't last past a season, but it was called Bluff City Law, and it was on NBC with Jimmy Smits and Caitlin McGee, and it was it's interesting because you can actually find quite a lot of nuance in those shows when you really get down to past the uniforms, and sometimes even in the suiting as well, to sort of find different little details in each character and help set each character apart. And one of the things I'm finding more and more is that even within a uniform or a suited show, and I think like Elisabeth is which is currently on CBS, is a great example of this, maybe to the nth degree. I mean, Dan Lawson, that costume designer, is amazing. But you're finding that I think showrunners and studios are tasking costume designers to go in and try to find the specificity between the different characters in contemporary shows to help the storytelling. So it's not just like the way maybe a lot of people dress in those environments where they just sort of go into whatever the store it is and pick out the suit that fits and then they're good for the week. It's more about, okay, but like, can we make something out of the earrings? Like, what about the fit? What about the fabric, the slight differences in color? And there's more and more opportunity, I think, for contemporary costume designers to really get in there to kind of set different characters apart. But I agree with you that it's of the spectrum of, fantasy and historical pieces and then contemporary horror. It's definitely an unsung art, and it's not easy. There's a lot of great work happening in contemporary projects.
Agreed. So I have been trying to focus more on my channel, just so you know.
I love that.
But anyway, of course, one of the big draws for the show is the fact that we have Kevin Bacon, who we've all grown up with him. We love him, we adore him, and he plays the title character Hub Halloran. So he's got a very specific look to him. You touched on it a little bit. So can you walk us through the process? Like, I think Kevin might have had a little bit of, influence. But how did that go? How did that relationship go with him? And especially regarding his bulletproof vest, which we were chatting about earlier.
Yes. Okay. So, well, first of all, on the page, his character is written as wearing black t-shirts and jeans. So immediately I read that,
And he's wearing kind of like, khaki or here, or maybe it is black, but it's just been
it's
destroyed.
black, but man, that t-shirt went through
Yeah.
the ringer. And that was one thing that I brought up immediately is like we could do black, but we really have to talk about the black and
Of
how
course.
what the black is. Is it leaning more brown, more purple, more blue, more red? And also, of course, anybody, who owns any kind of black clothing knows that if you've had it for a certain number of years, it's washed out, it's worked in, it's not a jet carbon black.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I read that on the page, what jumped out to me is that, okay, this character, he has his own uniform, so to speak, of clothes that he just feels good in and feels powerful in, but also feels subtle and collected and strong. But it's like a no muss, no fuss approach to clothing. And but I also felt some anxiety because will I have been the like 200th costume designer to put Kevin Bacon in jeans? I mean, like, Kevin is jeans, like when I have denim on the remit for other characters and other shows, inevitably a photo of Kevin in jeans is going to show up. It's like Kevin, Marlon Brando, like
Absolutely. Lee Ryder jeans.
Yeah. The Paul Newman, the best, jeans wearers of our time, and Kevin is one of them. Mm-hmm. And so immediately
did you put him on his own mood board then?
No.
Which would have been funny, right? If you did that. Hey, Kevin, I have this inspo board for you to show you.
Like, remember when you wore these jeans?
I was thinking that would be good. So it's cropped off. I can't remember what he's wearing. What did you end up going with then for him?
He wore Wranglers and Levi's. But it was a very, very specific cut. And then honestly, once we settled on the two styles of jean that he would wear, we really went in with the tailoring in terms of getting the fit just right. And they were washed and over dyed a bunch, and broken down, and then re-dyed back. And there was a ton of breakdown work done to his clothing. And Kevin, from the jump, was so available and generous with his collaboration, and very supportive of me. And I sort of basically sent him my initial pitch for his character, and because he was an executive producer, he really got the pitches for all the main characters, as well as the showrunner, the writers, etc. So he could kind of see, and basically these pitches were, a deck of images, and then I would write a short essay on where my brain was about each character in the show. Which is
you actually wrote some subtext for them, because I've heard, like a Bible, like some people. I've never heard of a costume designer doing that. That's so cool. I love that.
No. The subtext was written by the writer. We were given a history of who they were, but I wrote, that was all, of course, decided by our writers, but I jumped in on their approach to clothing, basically, and wrote like a short essay for each character, which I think is helpful when you're creating something from scratch, because a lot of it is a lot of question marks and a lot of decisions being made. And basically what I'm asking the writers and Kevin and the actors and of course our showrunner Eric to do is to like respond to to not only think about the backstory for the characters, but make sure we're aligned in how I'm thinking they approach their clothing. And if you're, if you say like, oh, I could see how you would say that, but let's actually pivot it here because I'm creating this character, as we're, on the fly essentially, and a lot of changes for certain characters went into it right up to the end, not only for their costume, but just sort of the characterization, etc. So Kevin had seen a lot of where like my thought process, and I think, and he was complimentary and supportive of that. And then when we started getting into talking about Hub, we talked about, wanting to make sure that the pieces were, on the rack, unremarkable, nothing that felt too stylish or contemporary. Obviously, we wanted things to feel timeless, worked in, etc. And we were able to, we scoured the internet, the state of Georgia, for vintage dead stock T-shirts from Hanes, any jerseys, any company you can think of, we considered the T-shirt because they're all made so differently. And, you can honestly there are some vintage stores in Atlanta where you can actually get like a set of the same dead stock shirt. And the problem we were running into is that contemporary fashion is actually more boxy. The silhouette is bigger, and there's more volume.
People are bigger.
Yeah, and it's also what's in style, and maybe when, they go hand in hand, right? So,
Liz, for my folks who don't know what dead stock is, do you mind explaining it to her? I learned about it a couple of years ago, but would you mind explaining what that is?
Sure. Essentially, the way I think about it at its core is it's a certain like lot, let's say, of clothing that was manufactured and is not anymore, but it exists in multiples, and it's
and it's usually new though, right? It's not like as opposed to vintage.
Exactly.
It's never been worn. It might have the labels even or the tags.
Exactly. And that is really like diamond in the rough for costume designers, honestly, often, because it comes with, first of all, it's vintage, but it's unworn. It has multiples, which of course we needed, like in any horror show, but you really need on any show ultimately. And it has this kind of aura about it, like, oh, untouched, was made, somehow survived. Here it is for me to pick and buy. It's usually not expensive. And it's becoming more and more rare. So,
and it's nice that it didn't end up in landfills, because I've heard of things sometimes just ending up in landfills, or they, God forbid, burn it,
Yes, exactly.
So I've heard that happen. I think that's more of a recent phenomenon, which is just awful. But it's always really fun. So did you get vintage Hanes then, or dead stock Hanes?
Yes.
Is that what he's wearing here?
He is wearing vintage Hanes. And that we, beat the crap out of and also altered. And the Hanes, though, we were buying on Depop and Poshmark and eBay and different vintage stores around the country, and like really zooming in and be like, does that look like the same little rectangular label that's different from this square label? And we just bought a bunch of stuff, and we're able to sort of cobble together, what a set of multiples, basically, just from our incredible shoppers, Danelle and Dana, or my assistant costume designer. Just really knocked it out of the park. And his boots that he's wearing are vintage too, which gave me incredible anxiety. But we were able to kind of, find a facsimile for his stunt, and they survived because they're so well made. And we take
amazing. I know this is the thing about some vintage clothing too. It's so well made. I was going to say, by the way, there's a guy who has a blog, and he's called the T-shirt guy, and that's all he blogs about. And he blogs about vintage shirts. He blogs about, like, he'll look at a movie like Rebel Without a Cause, and he'll do a complete breakdown. Like it's just, I just love how granular he is.
Yes.
I'll have to find it for you and send it to you. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next question.
Sure.
We spoke a bit about stunts. So there's a lot of stunt and effects in the Bondsman, so including blood, aging, and even underwater scenes. How did those productions needs shape your design? I mean, you touched on this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's tough because invariably, often what you might find that happens is the need for multiples. You feel like it really puts a crutch on what you want to do, because it's not only about what, the design, with a capital D, but it's also about, well, can we get enough, and do we have the right sizes, and how quickly can we get it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think I credit my experience in horror and also working with Marvel, with all that stunt work, that I feel a certain, every project is different, of course, but I do feel a certain amount of comfort and confidence with that type of work, and saying, like, okay, but what do we really need? And what is going to make us feel, what's going to sort of like achieve everything, honestly, for Hub, whatever felt the best for us, and whatever Kevin loved the most for the character, that took precedence, because he is, the center. I mean, he is it all. And then we just had to do, we did everything we could to make that happen, whether it was working tirelessly to find the vintage multiples, or, working tirelessly to make, he has a Filson jacket in the show that is off the rack, but it was an oilcloth yellow jacket, and we sucked all the oil out of it, and with a chemical, and then we over dyed it black, and it looks nothing like it would currently look if you went out with Filson. So it's a lot of hard work. But then when you get into the day players, the players that show up per episode, and you really kind of have to feel it out, in a way, feel out the stunt coordinator and the ADs, and how long things are going to take, and decide, okay, but like, what are the decisions I can make that will prioritize the design and prioritize the production? And sometimes it's a dance, it's delicate, because you don't, I just never want to compromise what it's going to look like, but I also never, ever want to be called out for not having what's needed. And both are, kind of huge problems for a costume designer, I think.
That makes sense. So what you're saying, like, when you're starting out as a designer, I had this one shopper we had on, and she was talking about at the beginning, like, she didn't know what she was doing. And it was just like, I think she got on, they hired her for a show to design it, and she didn't know what she was doing. Like, it was like trial by fire kind of thing. And so I think having that body of work, having that expertise, because also you must be sort of responsible for your team and keeping them like, okay, we've got this, guys. Like, you're kind of like heading up the team. So you have to be, sort of showing that confidence to them as well. So having that experience must be really good. I was going to mention to you, I really love, by the way, this is a side note, I love that couple who are getting engaged, and they were out at the picnic, and I love their outfits, by the way. And I totally noticed that. I was like, oh my God, I love that. So a lot of your side characters had some interesting designs. The other thing I was going to ask you, I was just noticing this early on, there isn't that much of an age difference between Kitty and Hal. So did you try to age down Kevin's character a little bit so that he came across maybe more in his 50s? Because I think he's in his 60s.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it wasn't 100% in.
Here's Kitty, by the way.
Yeah, I think I think what happened is we sort of took care of Hub's character, and got and established that first, like in our fittings and approvals, etc. And then knowing, prioritizing him and his look, and then knowing that Kitty could have gone a lot of different ways. She could have gone grandmother on the porch in a rocking chair who doesn't move much.
Yeah.
She could have gone very twee, kitschy, southern, lacy, kind of grande dame look. She could have gone a lot of ways. But I think that, and she honestly takes a little bit of a journey. I mean, we first see her, she's in a nightgown for a while. So we're kind of in that porch world. Then she goes to church and I remember this was a very pointed decision to have her kick up what she was wearing a little bit to go see the pastor and to investigate that situation with Hub, because she's going to her church. And so she has a long skirt on and a cardigan and her purse even. And then once it all gets rolling and we understand that she's going to revert back to her her roots of being a bondswoman, let's say, and put on her mama bear vest and get into it with Hub, then the clothing had to feel more active, more rugged, also, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have to feel feminine too, so, she wears purple, she wears blouses, but they're cotton and they're cut to support the vest, but they're not, it's not all the way to menswear, let's say. And I do think that kind of had an effect on Kitty to be a little more youthful. And I think Kevin t-shirts are a youthful, especially the cut of the shirt that Hub wore being kind of tight and a high sleeve line. It is also youthful, as opposed to something like, I'm thinking of my, Italian grandfather, or the shirt is like hanging down and, so they both kind of got, I think, a little energized by their silhouettes, those characters, because they both feel kind of active and youthful and ready to go out and kill somebody.
Yeah, well, and Kevin, Kevin Bacon's also very, like, he feels like eternally youthful as well. Like when you watch him on YouTube and he's playing the guitar, or like he was in Guardians of the Galaxy, like he just feels eternally youthful. So
it's so true, and it's true in real life. I mean, he's incredible.
So now I did want to, one of the things I love, it's sort of like a set piece. I'm not a set person, like I don't know much about it, but I love Kitty's porch. Like, did you guys just spend a lot of time there?
Yes. I mean,
I was like, I want that porch.
Yeah. She, I mean, first of all, they built that house. So that's
amazing. Wow.
Unbelievable. I remember driving, and it was on our lot. And I remember driving to work, in and out every day. I just see this house go up and I'm like, oh my God. And the porch yes, it was such, it just gave so much information and life and clues to their family and who they are. And yeah, Eve, our production designer, we worked really well together, and she's such an artist and also such a strong department head and woman. And,
because I had her
female production designers.
Yeah, Eve McCarney. And like, it's, obviously, because what I liked about the porch is very neutral, right? So anything that you would have on costume wise would just sort of pop against that beautiful neutral. But it just felt like it sort of felt like a really strange juxtaposition in a horror show where you have this very serene, natural porch, a place where it feels like everyone would just hang out and have like, what do they call it? Like, what's a Southern drink you would have, like a mint julep?
Mint juleps. Yeah. Yeah.
So, or an iced tea, like an American iced tea, because in Canada we sweeten our tea.
Yes.
So that's the thing that's different here. So you had a nice collaboration then, and also with the cinematographer who I have is Elliot Rocket. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Cinematographer. Yeah. I mean, we were really, and then David Daniels also did a fair number of episodes as a cinematographer, and it was really a dream team. I mean, we were just all, and I credit that to Eric Olson, our showrunner, because he did the same thing on Daredevil. He just puts together such a great group. It's great.
Well, we just have a little bit of time left. So before we do, we touched on this a little bit. So given your background on projects like Daredevil and, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, how does The Bondsman compare in terms of challenges or creative freedom to those shows that you've worked on in the past?
Well, I think that I would challenge it's tough because Very different in a way. In terms of the challenges were different, but I would say equally challenging. We had to treat Kevin's Hanes t-shirt, Wrangler jeans, vintage boots, and vest the way we would treat the Daredevil costume, and every night things needed to be tuned up and, reassessed. And because yes, you have multiples, but invariably one set becomes the favorite. And not for me, for him, one pair of jeans is the most worked in, one t-shirt is the best, just looks the best for whatever reason. It could even just be it's the fabric is you know what I mean? So it's like, it's a farce to believe, for the audience to believe, that we're just cycling through multiples of all the costumes just to sort of like, that's ideal if everything, but it's also not, continuity wise, not everything is the same, and comfort wise, not everything is the same. So I think I brought that sensibility from Marvel of like, okay, the Daredevil suit, of which there is a finite number and there's only one that really is the best. And, every night thinking about it the way, and bringing that mentality to the hub outfit, let's say, even though of course he had different shirts and different jeans, not only multiples, but just different changes. But bringing that, I think it made me more, very well prepared. But it's still the same kind of challenge. In terms of creative freedom, it's funny because Eric was the showrunner from the Bondsman, was with me at Marvel for Daredevil, and Jessica just was.
So you already had that. Yeah, I forgot to ask you. You already had that existing relationship.
Yes. Now, there are a lot of people on the other end of the approval process for both studios. I mean, for Marvel, it was like 50 something people you'd have to upload costume fittings to. But there was really there were a couple people who, of course, were the final word.
Were you working with Ryan Meinerding by any chance? Like,
no.
Oh, because I think he does some of the Marvel super suit sort of designs. He's more of a concept artist. I was just wondering if
yeah. And with Amazon and Blumhouse, there were, of course, it's the same kind of intense approval process, but there were just a little fewer people in the, on the other end of the line, but very similar in terms of wherein you and the process is you come up with, you have your idea, at its core, and then you pitch it to the showrunner, you pitch it to the actors, writers, and if everybody's on board, then you have to pitch it to the studio. And frankly, it's a yes or a no, and if it's a no, it's like, not quite, let's pivot somewhere else. And then you have to go back to the drawing board. And I think that both, that was equally the same process, actually, as it was with Amazon, as it was with Marvel.
Now, I don't want to give any spoilers away in case anyone hasn't seen this, but hopefully I can say this. There's a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of episode 6. Oh, actually, before I do that, can I just ask you very quickly, because we didn't get to touch on her, Marianne. I've got a picture of her.
Oh,
did you want do you want to make talk a little bit about, this is sort of like her show costume, like her
first show costume,
her performance outfit. Yes. And she's got lots of beautiful sparkly fringe.
Yes.
Her costumes are great though. And actually I did, when I saw her, the one she wore in episode 6, I was like, what is with this outfit? And it did feel like it was going to lead into something, which I felt it did. But I was like, there's something about this outfit that feels intentional. So anyway, I don't want to get into spoilers on that though, but but I did notice it.
Yes. I mean, it's funny because Jennifer, like Kevin, it was just such an amazing collaborator. So lovely, just the loveliest. But it's the same kind of, like, if to call a spade, it's the same anxiety of like approaching someone who is an actress who is so well versed in so much of so many parts of the character already. So, me coming to Kevin with a pitch about jeans is very related to me approaching Jennifer with a pitch about, performance wear and about a woman who's enmeshed in the country music scene, because Jennifer herself is a Grammy award winning music artist. And so but I think what they both hopefully appreciate, it seems to have appreciated, and I think the advice I would give is, it's so much about this, like, respecting what they already know and respecting what they will teach you, because invariably they will teach. Jennifer did teach me great nuggets about performance wear first and foremost. But it's also about finding the specificity in the characters that set them apart from who they are in real life, who the actors are, and bringing these specific ideas and nuances of their costumes and their approach to wardrobe to them, so there's something to kind of grab onto and take them away with, you know what I mean? And so there were Marianne's approach to dressing, it certainly had a little bit of a 70s feel to it. I mean, we were always, paying homage. We were also thinking very clearly, and Jennifer was so great in these conversations, thinking about who Marianne idolized in her world, because Marianne hadn't really made it yet. She was experienced in country music and she was a performer in her own right, but she was still on her way, and still had hopes and dreams for herself. And so invariably she would have people she'd be looking up to and idolizing. And that would have been, Loretta Lynn, but also Dolly.
Oh yeah.
And so
I know, because it had a bit of a Grand Old Opry kind of feel.
Yes, yes. You could see how Marianne would dying to perform there, and
by the way, this is just a side note, but does she not look a bit like Kira Sidgwick?
Kevin's wife? I know.
Has anybody commented on that too?
No, you are so right. That is so funny.
I noticed that immediately, especially her hair. Like, she's got that sort of same style hair. And of course, they're just adorable. Like, they do like videos together, Kevin and Kara. Oh, they're just so, and he is an amazing musician as well. Like,
I know,
Kevin
they recorded a whole album. They would sort of go off.
So you were just surrounded by amazing talent.
Yeah. It was just, it was such a great, it was such a great process. And I felt like I learned so much, not only in the research phase, but also in the production phase. And it was great.
Well, Liz, so, I was mentioning there's a cliffhanger. So is there any kind of like green light for a season 2? Is that still being quiet, or you don't have to answer?
I honestly don't know. If I knew, I could say, I think.
Okay.
But
it's just so weird, by the way, how they, one of the things someone was commenting on another show, how they didn't announce the season 2. And then it was like 5 months later, they announced the season 2. So they can't even start working on it. And then, so you have this huge gaps between, whereas I know occasionally they will green light it pretty much right away. So it's kind of hard for you, right? Like, to be able to have to hold on and wait and not know what to expect, because obviously you would want to return.
Yes. Yeah. It's the hardest part of the job, of the business, of the career, is the schedule, is sort of hope. What are you going to be working on next? When, where, the whole, that is I think the most challenging aspect to the career, for sure. But we're very hopeful.
I'll keep my fingers crossed for everyone. But before I let you go, so are you working on anything else? Obviously, we know you are working on some Marvel shows and some other projects. Are you allowed to tell us a bit about what you're doing?
Yes, actually, currently I'm working on, it's coming out. I also sort of costume design a show called Twisted Metal.
I saw that. I haven't seen season 1. So there's this, just maybe tell everyone a bit about it before I let you go.
Sure. So Twisted Metal is based on, the studio is Sony and the network is Peacock. So it's on Peacock. It's one of Sony's video game IPs. that was very successful in the 90s and early 2000s. And the show stars Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatriz and a whole host of other amazing, Samoa Joe from WWE fame, and a whole host of amazing cast members. And the first season was on Peacock, and the second season is dropping on July 31st on Peacock. And it's a different flavor for sure, but same amount of really like fun comedy, extreme stunt work, and yeah, fans of the game are fans of the show, and fans of Anthony and Stephanie, I think, would be really.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What would you call it? What kind of genre would you call it? Like sort of steampunk, or is it like action, or?
Well, it's I would say it's post-apocalyptic.
Yes.
This is what I would say. It's Mad Max.
Oh, okay.
It was a comedy.
I love it.
And instead of being in the desert of Australia, it's in, it takes place in the US, and all of its references are 90s and 2000s. So it's a real millennial
I'll have to ask my kids, because my kids are both gamers, so I'll have to ask them if they've played it. Yeah. Because when Twisted Metal is sort of like, there used to be like a comic called Heavy Metal, which kind of is like, so that's what I was wondering. But it's post-apocalyptic, so that sounds like totally my jam. I'm gonna for sure check it out.
Yes, and by the way, we shot the second season in Toronto.
Oh my God, that's amazing! I love it.
For 6 or 7 months, I think.
Oh wow! Hopefully not in the winter.
No, it was like June, I think, to December. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you're in New York, so it's not that different, but maybe a little bit
colder.
Yeah. Well, hey, I've kept you a long time. I want to just thank you so much. This has been such a great chat, and and if you're willing, I'd love to have you back. Like,
please,
maybe you could come back and talk about Twisted Metal with me.
I'd love to, and I'd love to talk about working in Canada, and anything you ever want to talk about, I'm here. I love it.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I'm trying to do more interviews with designers, and because it's really nice, like for first of all for me, because then I get to learn a lot. Like I had actually the costume designer for the Fall Guy come on, and I didn't really know about stunts and things.
Sarah.
And yeah, she's amazing. And then so we're I'm learning more about that, and then of course like dealing with blood and dealing with all the breakdown and stuff. So I'm learning so much, and it's been great. But also for my audience, it's really nice because they'll sometimes ask me questions. But also, I just wanted to check. I'm pretty sure you're on Instagram. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's a good place for people to come follow you. And
yep, it's just at Liz Vastola.
Wonderful. I'll put it in the comments if people want to come over. And you also have a website, I think. Is that correct?
And that one is ElisabethVastolaDesign.com, and it's with an S, Elisabeth with an S.
Wonderful. So I'll put links to that in below. So if people want to go follow you, and I will follow you, of course, and shout you out on there once this is out.
It's so important because there's no way to learn this job other than listening to other people talking about what it's like to do it. And so you're doing a huge service.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And we've been doing, actually, maybe this is something in the future, we've been doing panels as well. So, I sometimes have panels with people because I love to profile like costume illustrators who do such beautiful work. It's an unsung sort of hero as well, breakdown artists, shoppers. So we did, like I told you, we did a buyer's panel where we talked about people working and buying. So I want to thank you so much, and for taking the time out.
Yes. And by the way, there are some amazing illustrators in Canada. The ones that I've worked with, and I just recently worked with on Twisted Metal. Oh my God, like blowing people out of the water. Like,
okay. Well, when you come on, I'll find them, and then maybe if we're allowed to, we can share some pictures if we can check in. Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, so everyone stay tuned. We're going to have Liz back to talk about Twisted Metal. So I urge you all to check it. It's on Peacock, and which is NBC, I believe. In Canada, I have to check where that is. It might be different in Canada.
Yeah, it's NBC Universal. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So anyway, thanks again, and we'll have Liz back. And bye to everyone who stayed with us and watched today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Heidi.